How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Here's some Daf Kuf Chav Gimel, Daf 123 of Masechta BavaBasra. Today's a very interesting daf because we pushed ourselves a shtickle yesterday. We were able, today's basically just going to be very interesting stuff for the most part. Okay, how much battery do I have here? That's enough. Okay, fine. So we can start off Kuf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, about like 15 or so lines into the wider lines, at the two dots. So Reb Chelbo asks Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani. Now, Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani often is quoting his Rebbe Reb Yonason. Right now, he's currently not quoting his Rebbe Reb Yonason, but we're going to see that's going to be relevant in a minute. So Ba'amina Reb Chelbo Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani. So Reb Chelbo asks a kasha from Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani. Mara Yaakov shenotu b'chor Reuven v'natnu li Yosef. How come Jacob took the firstborn, right, the Bechorah from Reuben and gave it to Joseph? Mara, so Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani responds, what do you mean? It says because Reuven he desecrated Jacob's bed. So Ela Mara nitna li Yosef. Yeah, but why was it specifically given to Joseph? So Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani says, well, I'll respond with a parable. If you have a balabayis who raises an orphan in his home, okay, now in this mashal, Yosef is the balabayis who raises his father Yaakov in his home, right? He brought him to Egypt, he brought the whole family, and they gave him places to live and food and all sorts of things. And then at some later point, this Yosim, this orphan, became wealthy. And he says, I will benefit this balabais who took care of me. I'll help him out with my property. So in this case also, so then when Yaakov had an opportunity to pay back Yosef by giving the Bechorah to Yosef, he did so. But one second. There's like two things going on here. On the one hand, we're saying that Reuven sinned, and therefore Joseph got the Bechorah, but at the same time we're saying that Joseph got the Bechorah as a way for Yaakov to pay back Yosef. So if, based on that sort of mahalich, so those things are kind of separate. So then if Yaakov wanted to give Hakaras Tov to Yosef, but it also happened because Reuven sinned, but what if Reuven didn't sin? Wouldn't Yaakov still have given Hakaras Tov to Yosef? It's like, how could we tie those two things together? Elam Reb Yonason, Ella, so rather says Reb Chelbo to Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, Reb Yonason Rabcha lo kach omer. Didn't Reb Yonason, your Rebbe, say that really the Bechorah actually was fitting initially, that it should have come from Rachel, from Rachel? The Pasuk says, Eila told us Yaakov Yosef. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph. But Leah preempted this with mercy. But because of the tznius of Rachel, God returned the Bechorah ultimately to Rachel. What does it mean that Leah preempted it with mercy? The Pasuk says that the eyes of Leah were soft. My rakis, what does it mean they were soft? If it means literally they were like, she was crying all the time and her eyes were like all teary and leaky and shvach. How could that be? How could the pasuk so explicitly say that Leah was like shvach, that she was crying all the time? Is it possible that in Parshas Noach, when referring to impure animals, the pasuk was careful not to call them impure, but rather from the animals that are pure and from the animals that are not pure. It doesn't call them impure. It says the animals that are not pure. Bignus tzadikim dibar akosov, and yet the pasuk so freely spoke degradingly towards tzadikim, degradingly towards Leah, to say that, you know, her she was crying all the time and her eyes were all like soft and watery. Elo Amar Belazar, rather says Belazar she matnosea arukis. She had great gifts. Right, that inea rakos, that matnosea arukis, that she had great gifts. That Levi, right, her son was Levi, the Kohanim, the Leviim. Her son was Yehuda, the kings. Rav Amar says, Rav, la'olam rakis mamish. No, really, it does actually literally mean that her eyes, she was crying all the time. V'lo gnayu la, but that's not a bad thing. I'll tell you why she was crying all the time, for good reason. Ela shvachu la, it's in her shevach, it's in her praise. Shaisa shomaz al parshas dochim, because she heard on the roads. Bnei Adam shayu omrim, that you heard that the people were saying, Shnei banim yesh la l'Rivke, shtei banis yesh lo l'Lavin. Look, Rivke has 2 sons. Lavin, her brother, has 2 daughters. Gedol l'Gadol v'ktana l'Kohen. And the older one is going to marry the older one, and the younger one is going to marry the younger one. I.e., Leah is going to marry Esav, Rachel is going to marry Yaakov. And she asked, Gadol ma ma'asav, can you tell me? You know, Leah was the older daughter, so she was destined to marry the older son, Esav. So she wanted to know, tell me about this Esav guy. Ish rahu melastem brias. He's a bad guy, and he terrorizes people. Kohen ma'asav, okay, and what about his younger brother? Ish tam yoshev ohalim. He's a gevalig guy. He sits and learns. He's gishmak. Ve'hoisa bocha achinoshu risei enel. And when she heard that, she was crying and crying and crying until her eyelashes fell out, because she did not want to marry Esav HaRasha. And this is what the pasuk says: Vayar Hashem kisnu Leah, that God saw that Leah was hated. My snu, what does it mean hated? Ilim snu mamish. If it means that she was mamish hated, what could it possibly be that, as we saw before, that Torah doesn't even speak negatively towards an impure animal, and yet it would so freely say that Leah, a tzedekis, was hated? She saw that the characteristics, that the character of Esav HaRasha was so hated upon her. She had such a visceral reaction to the terrible traits of Esav. And God opened up her womb, and she had children. So that is the mercy that she preempted with, was that she so much wanted to marry Yaakov, and it was so much turned away from the evil ways of Esav. And what modesty, what tznius did Rachel have? The Pasuk says, "Vayaged Yaakov l'Rachel," that Yaakov says to Rachel, "Ki achi avia hu," he says to Rachel, "I am your father's brother, v'chi ben Rivka hu, and I am Rivka's son." V'alo ben achos avia hu. Why is he saying that he is her father's brother? He's her father's sister's son, her father's nephew. Elo Amar la, rather what he said to her is, Minsa basli, will you marry me? Amar le, and Rachel says yes. Miu, however, Abba Ramahu, my father's a tricky guy. V'lo yachot le, and you won't be able to out-trick my father. Amar le mai Rama Use, and Yaakov says to Rachel, tell me about his trickiness. Amar, and she says, Isli achta dikshisha minoi, well, I have a sister, Leah, who's older than I am. V'lo minsaba li mikama, and my father will never marry me off before her. Where am I? Amar lo, so Yaakov Avinu says to Rachel, Ochivanim baramos, well, I am just as tricky, I can be just as tricky as your father. Amar le, she says to Yaakov Avinu, Mishari lehu l'tzadik l'sagui baramausa. What do you mean? Are tzaddikim allowed to be tricky, sneaky people like my father? Yaakov Avinu says yes. If you have a nudnik, be a nudnik. Mosla Simonin, he gave her signs. But then what happened was, Rachel realized that when it was going to be the chasana, and Lavan was going to pull a quick one and marry Leah to Yaakov, Savra, my sister Leah is going to be embarrassed. So Rachel shared the secrets, the signs with Leah. And this is what the pasuk means. And it was in the morning. Leah, and behold, she was Leah. Does that mean that up until now she wasn't Leah? She was clearly Leah the whole night too. So Simonim Shemasula Yaakov LeRachel, but rather because of the signs that Yaakov had given to Rachel, Masai to Leah, and that Rachel had shared them with Leah, Yaakov only realized in the morning when it was light out that it was actually Leah and not Yaakov, because Leah and not Rachel, because Rachel had taken care of her sister in that way. Okay, Mamash Geval. Let's go weiter. Ba mine Abba Khalifa Kruya Mei Rabchia Bar Abba Bichlolon Ata Motzei Shivim Befraton Ata Motzei Shivim Chaser Echon. Right, that the pasuk says that 70 people went into Egypt, but if you actually count the people, it's only 69. So Amar Lei, so Rabchia Bar responds, okay, to Oma Haisa Imdina. Dina had a twin, and that's the 70th. Dichsiv V'es Dina Bito, and Dina's daughter, the V'es, is including also a twin. Elimata to Oma Haisa in Binyamin. Does that mean that Benjamin also had a twin? Dichsiv, as opposed to says V'es Binyamin Achib Benimo and Benjamin. Did he also have a twin? So Omar Margolis Tova Haisa Biyodi Vatim Vakish Adam Imeni. And Rabchia Baraba admits, look, I had this precious stone, I had a Gavaldiga tshuva, a Gavaldiga explanation, and I guess I was keeping it for myself, but you're now asking me to expose this drasha. This is what Reb Chama Bar Chanina says, Zo Yocheved, that the 70th, the discrepancy between 69 and 70 is because of Yocheved, Sha'uraso Baderech, V'leidaso Ben Achomus, that she was conceived prior to entering Egypt, but she was born in Egypt. Shenemar Asher Yalda Osa LeLevi b'Mitzrayim Leidasa b'Mitzrayim. She was born to Levi in Egypt. She was born in Egypt, Ve'en Orasa b'Mitzrayim, but she was not conceived in Egypt. And that's the discrepancy. When it says 70, it was including Yocheved. When it says 69, it was excluding Yocheved. Ba'amine Chelbo Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Chelbo asks Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Ksiv the pasuk says Vayi Kasher Yalda Rachel es Yosef v'Gomer. It was when Rachel gave birth to Yosef. At that point, Yaakov Avinu decided it's time for me to leave Lavan's house. What exactly happened that all of a sudden when Yosef, his 11th child, was born, he decided now it's time to go? Yaakov, so Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, Yaakov Avinu Sheinzar Shel Esav Nimsar Ela Biyadzar Shel Yosef. Yaakov Avinu saw that the children of Esav are only going to be delivered to the descendants of Yosef. Esav is going to be delivered into the hands of Yosef. Shenemar v'hoya beis Yaakov eshu beis Yosef lahava. The house of Jacob is going to be fire, and the house of Jacob is going to be a fire. Joseph is going to be a flame. Beis Esav lekash v'gomer, and Esau is going to be straw. Esvei, but we have a kash vayakim David, that David from Yehuda smote them. Me'aneshef v'ada erev. From, I think it's a shaila of what Neshef is, but let's say from twilight. What's twilight? Evening? From evening to evening? The Machrosim the next day. So that's Judah, that's not Joseph. So Omar Lei, so I guess Shmuel Bar Nachmani responds, the Akrich Nevi'e lo Akrich Ksube. Whoever taught you the prophets, Nevi'im, didn't teach you Ksuvim. Tichsev, it says in Ksuvim, I'm going to read from the Pasuk, Bilechto el Tziklog, when he went to Tziklog, Naflu olav mi Menashe. They joined up with him from Menashe. Adnach v'Yozavad v'Yidiyael u'Michael v'Yozavad v'Eliu v'Tzilsei B'tzilsoi Roshi Alofim Asher LeMenashe. So we see that, right, so from Menashe, from Yosef actually joined up with King David. Most of Rav Yosef asked the kasha from the next pasuk, Umehem min bnei Shimon, from Shimon, Holchu la'Har Seir to Har Seir, Anoshim b'chamish me'os uflatya, u'ne'arya u'refaya v'uziel bnei Yishi b'rosham, Vayaku es cheiris apleta la'amalek v'yesh v'sham adayom hazeh. So we see that the bnei Shimon were fighting against Esau. Amar Rabba Barshila Yishi Bnei Menashe Osi Tichsiv Bnei Menashe Chefer v'Yishi. Well, Yishi actually was from Menashe, so also from the tribe of Joseph. We're going to stop here. Super interesting daf. We had a whole Garita with Rachel and Leah, very very famous stuff, and very also with Yocheved and that discrepancy. And peace out.